Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And today is episode 188 of Podcast 2 for 1, youtube.com/2for1 studios. That's the best place to consume all the content. And guys, if you didn't know, let's be honest, you probably don't, we are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located at 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas. There they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout the year.
Kapow.
It's episode 188. It's our Christmas episode. It's our last episode of 2023. And if you're on the YouTube channel, as I always say, you already know we are joined yet again by Dr. Bruce Hutchinson.
I'm really happy to be here. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Time of year. Yeah,
it is. I think, Bruce, and I could be wrong, I think this is the shortest gap we've ever had from your previous
I think so.
appearance. Yeah, we've only shot one episode between now and then. We will have two come out before your appearances, but still, I mean, like 3 weeks. You know, it's not too far away.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, we could do this all the time. I love it.
Oh, perfect. Guys, if you looked at the thumbnail or you looked at your podcast title, we are talking Home Alone because it's Christmas time. And we've only done one other Christmas movie throughout our podcast history, and that was Die Hard. And we are hitting, I would say, a more classical Christmas movie in the way of Home Alone, directed by Chris Columbus and, of course, written by John Hughes, also produced by him, starring, God, I can't think of his name now. Macaulay Culkin. There we go. Yeah. And a slew of other great actors that's been in other things throughout time and space. And let's kind of go ahead and start breaking down this movie. And I want to start with your guys' thoughts of your Home Alone. And I'd be surprised to think that you didn't love it. But let me go ahead and start with Bruce here. Bruce, what's your thoughts on Home Alone?
I'm going to complicate things for us a little bit today. So, this is probably the third time I watched it. The first time I watched it, I think I was like, I don't know how old I was. I was probably in college or something, and I probably didn't have much patience for, all of the kid shenanigans of the movie. Wow. And I just thought it was okay. And then I watched it again a couple of years ago, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And I was surprised I had forgotten like how moving the movie is, and how great it is. The ending when he and his mom are reunited. But then I watched it again this week, and while I still think the emotional qualities are there, I actually realized that I kind of feel like there's some issues with the movie, and I actually think it could be a lot better. I know it's crazy, thank God John Hughes is no longer with us because it hunt me down. But no, I when we get into it, I think there's some things that actually could be better about it. And I will say that largely for me, what makes the movie work is Macaulay Culkin. He is so good in this movie. He's so great. And the rest of the cast too, especially Catherine O'Hara. But really it's Macaulay Culkin's movie. And I think it's sort of a tour de force that, it works so well because of him primarily more than the story or the structure or even the plot, which again, I'm looking forward to getting into. But that's my initial 2 cents.
No, I think you're right in the fact that, I mean, I've seen it probably maybe once a year my whole life, maybe, because, I was born in 92, it came out in 1990. And so I feel like I watch it every year. I mean, it's probably like a tradition or something, kind of like Die Hard or these other Christmas movies. But I think you're right in the fact that I watched it today, this morning, and I was kind of like, oh, wow, yeah, there's some interesting plot things happening here. But because of nostalgia, because of like the Christmasness of it, I was kind of like, it still works for me because obviously it's, got a lot of fun things in it. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on under the surface of this movie. Daniel?
I loved Home Alone as a kid, though I preferred Lost in New York, which is Home Alone 2. And I think this watch, it's probably been 20 years since I've seen the first Home Alone. And so first off, I would say I liked it. It definitely made me feel like Lost in New York was still my favorite because I've seen that relatively recently, last 5 years at least. But it's interesting because I was probably, like I said, it could be 20 years, maybe 10, 11, 12 years old last time I watched it, and like the majority of my memories from the movie happened in the last 30 minutes of the movie. You know what I mean? And so like the iconic things about Home Alone, kind of the mouse trap, booby traps and stuff like that are really, it's not much of the movie. You know what I mean? It's a very small portion. And I do think, like, I agree, there's some interesting things about, if, obviously Kevin is the protagonist, but his goals are very muddy at times and then very clear, but it's kind of a leap from what he was doing previously to this, like, time to defend the house. You know what I mean? So there's just some disconnect between that. Honestly, his mom has the stronger goals in the film, obviously, and is kind of follows a more traditional track of like trying to achieve the goal, running into conflict and having to adjust kind of things. But yeah, it's again, Joe Pesci and I'm blanking on the Daniel something, or is it something Daniels?
Stern. Daniel Stern.
Daniel Stern, yeah, are great and still like so iconic to me. And like, some of their interactions with the kid, especially previous to when they are kind of taking each other head on, are great. And yeah, I think obviously the mom kills it. She comes across incredibly real. And I think her and Macaulay Culkin really sell that mom and son chemistry that works really well. So yeah, lots to talk about though, I think, which is, well, let's get into it.
I think before we dive deep into the sequence breakdowns or however we're going to look at it, maybe we talk about some top level surface things, Bruce. Any interesting things you can think of coming out of the gate? I know for me, I felt like one of the more noteworthy things was about halfway through the movie. I feel like Kevin's arc is right. He's learned his lesson, like right at literally the halfway point. And it's kind of like from there, it's just, we get into the heist or the heist, but I guess a heist, break into the house and those kind of things, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, any top level thoughts, Bruce, as we go in?
Yeah, a couple of things, and I think you guys have already started touching on them. I just divided this into a classic 3-act structure, pretty straightforward on that level. But it also has this classic dual plot line structure, right? Where Kate, Kevin's mom, is driving one plot line and Kevin is driving the other plot line, right? At least from the point when she discovers that she's left Kevin behind. I mean, it's her / the family, but it's really her, right? Especially once she separates from the family, and then kind of goes on her own voyage. And so, of course, we're cutting back and forth between those two plot lines. And it makes sense because, as Daniel alluded to, the whole mousetrap is part of the movie that we all remember is really just the last act. It was like the last 30 minutes or so. It's hard to imagine if we didn't constantly cut to Kate's travels, what we would do with Kevin the entire time. I mean, it seems like he could get into a lot of hijinks, but as we'll discuss, how the movie is actually set up maybe sort of limits some of the possibilities for what he can do. So we end up having to cut to this other storyline. And of course, I think that just gives the movie more heart, right? Because we're constantly reminded what Kevin is missing by seeing his mom and seeing how much she loves him and, wants to get back to him, even though, she forgot him in the first place. They all forgot him. It's not just her fault. So yeah, I think that's true. And then the other thing that you said, Donovan, was just when you think about the external and I guess we'll call it internal goal. His movie level external goal is to defend the house from the robbers. I mean, it builds slowly, but clearly that's sort of his main external goal. But his internal goal of learning to appreciate his family, which is very strongly set up in the first act, kind of, it sort of peters out a little bit, or at least like you said, if not halfway through, certainly by the time he has, when he's at the church and he talks to Marley, he has the lesson because he imparts the lesson to Marley that he should reunite with his son. So at that point, it's kind of over, or that goal line is kind of over until his mom comes back. And I think one of the things that's weird about the movie that we'll dig into is that there doesn't seem to be much of a relationship between the external goal and the internal goal. I think they're supposed to be. Most Hollywood movies have that relationship, and certainly there is something thematically that relates to them. But usually it's like the success of one goal influences, you have to achieve the external to get the internal, or vice versa. But when he figures out that he learns to appreciate his family, it's not like that gives him anything in particular to help defend his house. And so that is one of the oddities. I'm going to call it oddities rather than flaws, because I don't want to be judgmental about this holiday Christmas classic. But it does seem odd that the goals don't really connect up nearly as well as they could. So those are a couple of my thoughts overall.
Yeah, all great, and I do have a few maybe suggestions at the end to kind of maybe fix some of these oddities, Bruce. So to me, the first sequence here, I kind of end around minute 12, which is typically, if our listeners don't know, or viewers, you can almost always find like where the movie goal or the major dramatic question, whatever, comes in right at the 10-minute, 12-minute mark, almost like every time. It's kind of fun for me watching the movie and then pausing it right when it happens and seeing what the timer is. So I'm always kind of curious of when this is happening. But anyway, the movie opens up. We had the family, the chaos of the house. They're all getting ready for a flight next day. We already have Joe Pesci as it's a Harry there, but he's disguised as the cop. And the first couple minutes we get Kevin's personality. We get that he's smart, that he's a smart aleck, that he's kind of breaking the fourth wall a little bit, looking at the camera, these kind of things. He's helpless. He's smaller than the rest, or at least everybody kind of views him that way in the house. And then we kind of, I think right at the 5-minute mark, he's kind of started seeing like, he wants to live alone, right? He doesn't want a family when he gets older. There's too many people in this house. And a lot of this is kind of setting up the dynamics of the family, the pizza coming in. There's lots of foreshadowing happening throughout this movie too, like the pizza delivery guy, seeing the spider, those kind of things.
I do want to say, I do think this is maybe more of a social cultural comment, but I do think it's interesting seeing, because I feel like the portrayal of Kevin's family, I don't blame Kevin for not wanting any of them in his life at the beginning of the movie, because all of them feel very toxic and like not what you would call like a nice family to be a part of. But the film definitely positions this family as but it's a good one, especially because of the ending when they all kind of come and be like, yeah, we love you after all. I just think it's interesting, like now thinking about modern family movies or where families are portrayed, where this would be labeled as toxic by the viewers. I think most of the time, like watching the, they're like, wow, yeah, this family has some really bad systemic issues, like you know what I mean? Versus where at the time it was just like, I remember watching it as a kid and being like, yeah, that's just a normal family, which maybe it is, but I just think it's interesting, like what culture thought was normal about good families in the 90s and how that's portrayed kind of in the beginning and at the end of this film. Because yeah, I mean, that I remember as a kid thinking, he was getting the short end of the stick. And then I remember watching it now, I'm just like, yeah, I don't want to go to Paris with any of these people either.
I think the biggest bad guy in the family is obviously the uncle. Even just the way he reacts when Kevin spills the stuff, yeah. It's like that's like abusive, like how he acts, Well,
then he's like stealing the salt shakers on the plane.
Right. Yeah. He's not, they don't, and even later when he's like wishing his family back, he's like, if you have time for my uncle, bring him back, so yeah, they kind of set that up. But, I mean, I'm not sure. I would say toxic. I guess Buzz obviously is getting in trouble. All the kids are being really mean kids, which I think is kind of normal. I don't think the mom and dad are doing anything
No,
terribly
no,
bad.
it's mostly like the uncle, and then like the fact that he's like, what did they call, like basically in front of the parents, they just call him a bunch of names, which are pretty mean. Like says he's a
Right.
disease. The uncle
They
says he's
call him
like
a
an
little,
idiot, and
a
they just
little
don't defend
jerk.
him. Which
Sure.
yeah.
Even if you didn't say that they were toxic, certainly he gets bullied by a number of his siblings and other
Sure.
people. And I think
Yeah.
we have language to talk about what happens to him in a way that we didn't when the movie
Yeah.
came out in 1990.
Right,
So
right.
yeah.
I mean, there is an interesting thing too, just the way he talks to his mom. And Kevin talks to his mom. It's very. I would have been destroyed by
Right.
my parents
Yes.
if I talked to my
Yes.
parents the way he talks to his parents. And so it feels like, they allow that from him to them. So like all the kids kind of get free reign of talking to whoever, however they want. So that's kind of set up, which
Yeah, it seems
obviously
like
is
maybe these parents have just had one or two kids too many.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Right.
just
Right.
don't seem
Right.
to be able to
Yeah.
control them
Yeah.
anymore. Yeah.
Yes. Also,
Um,
shout out to Buzz's haircut because it's just fantastic. It's just
perfectly 90s, perfectly 90s.
and perfectly the bully haircut. Yeah, it's great.
Lots of little things being set up though, like whenever Joe Pesci's interviewing the dad, that we have auto timers, we have locks, we're
Yeah.
leaving at 8 a.m. in the morning, things like that. I think the movie does a good job though of constantly setting up these little things, either visually or by dialogue, to kind of like, explain, a scene later, something like that. I thought was kind of nice.
Well,
But I think
there's a lot going on. It's really hectic, but it really works for me.
Yeah.
I feel like,
like
right? Like
every
people, like,
minute.
just
Yeah.
watching, even just like when they would do long kind of like tracking shots where just people were coming in and out of frame and throwing bags down, and like it was very well choreographed, right? I thought just the blocking and like all that kind of stuff felt good.
Yeah, I think like all these scenes, they never last more than a minute. Like
Yeah,
throughout the whole
it's
movie.
quick. It's very
I mean,
quick.
Yeah, no, the
like
pacing is really great in that first
yeah,
half,
it's
especially.
pretty fast.
Yeah.
I mean, just in the sequence, I kind of feel like, it's he wishes that he didn't have a family anymore. She's like, I hope you don't mean that. And he's like, no, I do mean it. It's kind of like we're setting up a Wonderful Life situation, right? Where
Yeah.
he's thinking it might be supernatural or something magical, and in fact, it's not. But that's kind of where I think sequence one ends, is kind of setting up that movie level goal of what's the meaning of family, or like getting the family back together, those sort of things.
Yeah, it's also worth pointing out that, like, for me, the inciting incident still hasn't happened yet. For me, I would say the inciting incident, which almost feels like an Act One climax, but I still call it the inciting incident, is when he wakes up the next morning and he goes around and nobody's there, and then he's like,
Sure.
I made my family disappear. And then a couple of minutes later, we see Kate, and she gets her own inciting incident when she realizes that she forgot Kevin. But it's also really interesting in how many, like, a lot of times with an inciting incident, there's a setup and payoff. Like there's one thing that happens that sort of sets it up, and obviously then there's the payoff that makes the inciting incident. Here, there seems like there's half a dozen of them. There's all these little moments that are building it up, from when stuff gets spilled on the counter and the dad mistakenly throws away
Passport.
presumably his
Ticket.
passport,
Yeah.
and ticket, and then and then even the next morning, I mean just one thing after another, the power goes out, the kid
Right.
from across the street comes over and then gets counted as one of the kids, so there's all these things.
The phone company thing that they're yelling to her while she's getting into the van the next morning.
Yeah. So part of it's contributing, but part of it's all these like setups. It's like, okay, this has to happen, and this has to happen, and then all these, and then even Kevin getting us, sort of shoved up into the third floor sort of attic room, right? And then I get a little lost. I don't think it's his brother. I think it must be his cousin who wets the bed, right?
What's funny is that it actually is Kieran Culkin.
Kieran Culkin, I know.
I did not know that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even that, he's like, I don't want to have to sleep up there because, he wets the bed. And then the mom's like, well, we'll find another place for him to sleep. So now we've removed him. So now he's stuck by himself up there, So all of these things, I mean, we've got so many setups to this thing of him finally getting, left home alone.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great though. I mean, I like the speedy, the expediency of all that. And I kind of feel like, there was times where I was kind of like, well, how are they going to, justify this? It's like, oh, okay, it's because of that, or it's because of this. And, I
Yeah.
enjoy that part of it actually a
It's,
lot.
it is reminiscent of especially that 80s and 90s, like, although it's funny, I'm going to say this, like, I think of movies like Back to the Future that are so carefully plotted and planned out. It is really funny though, because at the end of the movie, there's some incredible huge plot holes that you could drive a truck through, but there is a lot of really great setup at the beginning.
You know, and it's interesting, as I know we're kind of getting towards the end of Act One and talking about what's next, but you're right. It has all this setup, and it's so fast paced, getting us there. And then once we get there, the movie really slows down
Mhm.
for like the second act. Like, I mean, it's very, especially while Kevin's like enjoying the freedom. And even with his mom, even though she's frantic, she's not getting anywhere fast. So there's
Right.
like, those scenes are more, are feel maybe a little faster or feel a bit more panicked, but it's not like she's making a lot of progress. And it is just that I did notice that drop in pacing. And I think even as like a kid, I think it's what's interesting is like my firmest memories of this movie are like the first 20 minutes and the last 30 minutes.
Right.
You know what I mean? As a kid. And I think that makes sense even just at the pacing, that it just kind of, it changes at that point.
But yeah, it is
Uh,
interesting that all of this is setting up primarily his internal goal, which is,
Yeah.
he doesn't like his family and he's going to have to learn to appreciate his family.
The only thing that's
Obviously,
setting up is Joe Pesci, right? Is
yeah,
the
yeah,
only thing.
we know,
Yeah.
we see the setup. And actually, this movie is really interesting because I was trying to think of something I was going to say, and I just remembered it, which is, all of this setup about him getting left home alone, like, is really well done, but also like the movie's really hectic. But if you go to watch this movie, you know what the movie's about. I mean, even in 1990, the movie is called Home Alone. Like,
Right.
I don't know who goes to see this movie and doesn't know the basis of the movie, right? So when you're watching it, like, you already know that Kevin's going to get left home alone. And so all of this stuff is just like, you pick it out, right? It's happening so fast, but you know what's going to happen. So all of these moments, they're like precursors. You know to look for
Mhm.
them, and like you said, Donovan, they are then setting up things for later on. Like, how could the family be so dumb and leave this kid behind? But it goes to great lengths to show all of the ways that they were like trying to do the right thing and count the kids and all this, and the ways that that gets frustrated and screwed up.
well, I think that's necessary for you to still like the mom or have
Yeah.
Yeah.
sympathy for
Right.
her.
Yes.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
kind of had to make them not seem dumb or just,
Which
whatever. Yeah.
that challenge becomes doubly hard every sequel, right? I mean, I don't even. I mean,
Let's
they're
just
having to
let's
make
leave him alone again,
keep
right?
three. I mean, two more times with Macaulay, right?
Yeah.
He's in the third one, isn't he? Or is it the
No,
fourth
I
one?
don't think he's in the third one.
no, he's
Okay,
just in
okay,
the
okay.
second one. Yeah,
Okay.
he's
Yeah.
in the second
Yeah. So for it to happen
Um,
again to the same family, yeah, I'm sure when they sat down, it's like, how do we make them still likable when they do it twice?
Yeah.
You change locations. That's how you do it. So
Right. Yeah,
I kind of want to go through this, but for me, Act One ends at minute 34. It's kind of where my Act One ended.
Yeah.
So I had sequence one in around the T. I think there's a lot smaller sequences, and maybe we're different on this, but sequence one for me ended at like the minute 12. Or ended like a minute 14. Sorry, we slept in basically. That's kind of where that sequence ends, right? They're waking up, we slept in.
Right.
And I kind of had this like micro sequence ends when Kevin wakes up. So like minute 18. So it's like Kevin wakes up and he begins to investigate. The house is empty. And then we have that all the way to minute 22. And it's like our second meta moment, where it's like the cars are still here. I wish them away. Um, and then I had an interesting note here at minute 23 whenever he's going through Buzz's stuff and he says, Buzz, I'm going through all your stuff. And to me, it kind of like that was already a precursor of like he's not quite believing it that they're gone, or also that he is already kind of showing signs that he misses them because he's talking this, for me, that's how it come across for me, that he's already not even, a few minutes in and he's kind of already like, you know, missing them. I don't know. That's kind of how I read it. Um, we're set up the BB gun, of course. We set up Angels with Filthy Souls. Um, And then we end that sequence at mom, him or like yeah, him screaming mom, and then her kind of waking up in the airplane. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like I mean, and then I had one more final sequence here. Basically, them landing in Paris, um, the cop getting the cop to check on Kevin, those kind of things. But like, I feel like there's a lot of little micro scenes here that kind of do have different little, um, I don't know.
Yeah, a couple of things on sort of the structural thing. One is anytime you're cutting back and forth, of course, you're going to set up what almost feel like if we leave the mom and we go back to Kevin and when we're with Kevin for let's say 3 scenes and then we go back to the mom, that does feel like some kind of unit, you know. I don't know that it always is, but you know, when we cut back and forth between multiple plot lines, anytime, you know, we do that, I think we sort of have that sense of course, there's a little thing here. And then of course, if that's also sort of defined by like a new day or something like that. I'd also say that act ones almost always can be broken into sequences, even if the whole movie doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. Because if nothing else, like you said, Don, when like the inciting incident often happens at the 10 to 15 minute mark. I put this one later, but nevertheless, like a lot of times you have the first half of the act being up until that moment, and then the second half being from the inciting incident to the climax. So you most always can make an act one into two sequences. And because this one is longer, this act runs 35 minutes, it makes sense that it almost feels like it has 3 sections. But I agree with you. I think that Kevin's inciting incident is discovering that he's alone. I think Kate gets her own inciting incident a few minutes later when she realizes what she thinks that they forgot. I think the climax is the police officer knocking on the door and not
Hmm.
finding Kevin. And I do want to come back to that in a minute. And then for me, I ended Act One around the 36-minute mark when Kate goes on standby and she hugs her husband and he leaves, and then that sort of feels like it ends the first unit, especially because then we start act two and we pick up Kevin in the bathroom the next day, right?
Hmm.
And that's sort of a natural break. So yeah,
I
that's
think
kind of
one,
how I saw it. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think we in the same place. I think one reason I kind of was like, kind of, I don't know, blocking out so many little sequences is because each of these 2 to 3 minute scene or 2 to 3 scenes, they all have like different goals within them. So I was kind of like, these are, it just kind of, it just felt a little unique to me because sometimes, you know, you're cutting back and forth between two different locations or whatever it may be, and they're still kind of carrying the same thing. But I feel like there's a lot being set up in this first act. So it to me is like, you know, just like these little chunks here that were just kind of all could be separated and looked
Yeah.
at. So yeah, Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys. I mean, I think I do think for me, I do think the police officer is the first time Kevin seriously regrets not having his family around. It's kind of like that. Just he's scared about it. And for me, the Buzz thing, I think to me that was just like he was trying to rub it in his brother's face, but
Sure.
his brother's spirit's face, whatever his thinking was at the time. But yeah, no, I mean, I think, like I said, I think this is the point I said where I feel like, you know, when we wake up the next day and we're kind of in the Kevin montage of him starting to enjoy the freedoms, right? Where we start really slowing down and stuff. But yeah, no.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a really interesting part of the movie. And this is the first place where I feel like there's a transition here that's gonna be a little weird to me. So when he realizes he's alone, he does what I think we assume he would do and what every kid would do, which is that he embraces not just being alone, but being able to be an irresponsible kid, right? So he gets the crazy marshmallow ice cream chocolate sauce, you know, plate. It's a super funny choice, but it's an innocent movie, so you know he's going to watch a forbidden movie, which is this old film noir that's somehow violent, but of course is still, you know, whatever, 40 plus years old, you know.
Violent with no swear words and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But it's like it seems like his version of watching something he's not supposed to watch, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
He seems to stay up late, right? So he's doing all these things. And then we get a run of 3 things at the end of the act that sort of change the tone for Kevin, right? So the first one is Harry and Marv initially try to break in, right? And he hears them, I guess, at the back door,
Yeah.
and
Turns the light on.
he turns the light on, right?
Yeah.
And so they just think someone's home and they leave. And he sort of like he was maybe initially scared, and he's like, I'm not scared, and he runs outside, right? And he's like, I'm not scared, I'm not scared. And then immediately he looks up, and Marley, the old guy from next door, is standing right there. He freaks out, runs back in the house, runs into, I think, what seems to be his parents' bedroom. It's a little unclear, but
I think
goes
so.
under the covers. And then there's a banging on the door, which is the police officer. I think Kevin maybe thinks it's Marley, but either way, he's now scared, right? He continues to be scared, and he hides under the covers. So we get those three things: the robbers, the cop, or Marley, and then the cop, right? And these things change seemingly his bad behavior, his being a kid, you know. And this is the first, and so then when Act 2 starts, and this will transition us nicely, and I want to hear what you guys think. I put for his Act 2 goal to live like an adult. He suddenly seems to embrace trying to live like an adult. So he's taken a shower, he's putting on deodorant, he puts on aftershave. He's lost his toothbrush, so he very maturely decides that he's going to go out later and get a new toothbrush. He does that, and he wants an ADA-approved toothbrush. He then, you know, we can get it more into Act 2 later, but he defends the house some more. But he buys what seems like, you know, he makes himself mac and cheese later. He orders pizza, which, I mean, ordering pizzas maybe a little bit, but still, like, his parents did that the night before. So he seems like he's now adulting, right? It feels like his goal is to sort of be an adult, because he's left behind all of the stuff about acting like a kid.
Yeah.
What I can't figure out is why. Like, it only kind of makes sense to me that maybe he's thinking, okay, I can't be afraid, therefore I'm going to act like an adult because adults aren't afraid. But he doesn't say that. He doesn't connect those dots for us. And if he's like, the night before, he got so scared of everything, like, he shouldn't leave the house. You know, it makes sense that he would just stay home, or that he would hide under the covers. So it's sort of like the movie gives him this goal to be like an adult, but doesn't really, at least in my mind, totally justify why he's decided to do that. And we're just kind of supposed to go with it. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I wrote. Oh, so real quick, I'll let you talk. I wrote on my, like, Act 2. I put the goal for him for this act is to survive on his own, which is what adults do, right? So, so that's kind of what I put. I think you're right, though. I don't know. There's no clear answer for that, because again, he just kind of miraculously overcomes his own. I mean, he's telling someone else, you know, his internal completion at the church later. So I agree with you. Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I mean, I think I see it from, like, I think I see what they were going for, which I feel like is, like, he has resigned that he can't wish his family back. So he has supernaturally wished them away, and therefore he's on his own. So he better start acting like an adult because he doesn't have a mom and dad anymore, kind of thing, right? But I do not think that they make that clear, and they could have easily. I feel like, I mean,
exactly.
It could have been a 5-second little monologue, little thing from Kevin, and I do think part of it. I mean, I think, you know, when I'm thinking about, like, what is the appeal of this movie, like, obviously, and, like, even for, you know, it's a family movie, so it's trying to appeal to kids and adults, parents, right? And we can kind of see the clear line of, like, you know, it's simulating what an adult might feel if they left their kid at home. That's engaging, I think, right? And I do think there's an element of this, of, like, the humor and the cuteness that comes from Macaulay Culkin acting like an adult. And I think that's even, like, what his appeal was as an actor of that time, is that he's this little kid that can talk and kind of enunciate and, like, and perform things that feel older than he is, right? And that's the kind of I feel like was a part of, like, what his acting was and why he was popular as he was, right? And so I think I feel like there's this weird element of like, you know, we're leaning into what we think people will like just on screen and kind of just humor and silliness and things like that, and also that kids will like, you know, I think. But yeah, I think at a and I do think, you know, I wonder because they're marketing this more for kids and younger, if they think, well, that's enough, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't need to paint, you know, make it as clear because we're getting to the part that everyone will like and it's fun and maybe you won't care as much. And there's a little bit element of that. I think this second act is like, it slows down, but it's also cute and a little whimsical, and you know, it is where the heart of the story kind of starts trickling in that will be kind of paid off, I think, fully at the end. So yeah, no, I think it is. It's interesting, and I, like I said, I think it could have been fixed very easily.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I was gonna say it
Sorry
may, it
about
may
cutting you,
have
sorry.
it may no, you're fine. It may have been in the movie. It may have been an editing choice that we never
Yeah,
saw.
You're right. You're
Yeah.
right.
Something like that, and they may just been like, "Hey, this kid we got, he's incredible, and we don't need this 5 second scene or this whatever this is, or it's too clunky or whatever." You know, who knows what happened? But I mean, it's something that, granted, you know, I've never tried to watch this movie with this kind of eye on it before, but
Yeah.
I've never
Right.
cared my entire life until today.
Yeah.
You know,
But yeah, exactly. And it is weird, you know, I mean, he does a lot of things, you know, like Daniel said, I mean, he lip syncs these songs, and a lot of times it's with this really deep voice, you know, of course, which he
Yeah.
doesn't have, but it sort of sets him up that way. And he does, I think you're right. It's cute in the sense that the ways he tries to adult are still childlike, you know. So he needs money, so he crawls up the shelves, and then they all break, and you know the tarantula escapes, and all this. You know, so he's still making kind of kid versions of adult choices, but
Right.
it's still really weird that like I mean, I know that part of it's about Marley, but like we actually have a couple of scenes where his goal is to go buy a toothbrush, and it just seems so strange. Like there's so many things, like there's almost an infinite number of things that you could have Kevin doing on his own by himself, and he's going to the store to buy a toothbrush. Like you know, and maybe there's something cute in how mundane that is. But also, you know, when I was mentioning that we have to cut to the mom in order to fill out the story, I think this is part of why, because in choosing to have Kevin act like an adult, you kind of cut off some of the possibilities of what he could do if he was just still being a crazy kid, you know, and he could try to do these ridiculous things, and get himself into all kinds of trouble. I'm not saying that that would have necessarily worked, but you can see that that probably would fill up more scenes than him just being an adult and sort of like, okay, well, you know, if he's going to sort of act in a boring quote unquote way, you know, by doing things that adults would do. Whoa.
What the heck just happened?
it was like behind you too, and I was like, "Whoa, what's going on?"
That
Audio
was awesome.
listeners, yeah, we just had an attack of balloons exclusively on Bruce's screen.
I think I have some answers for this though.
Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
Like,
yeah.
and I think there's a couple things. I think one thing that's happening here, the time that this movie was made, right? I think John Hughes and these guys, John Hughes at the top of his game, like he could do no wrong at this point in his career. And I kind of wonder, based on they cast, you know, I can never say his name. I'm afraid to say his name. I'm afraid I'm going to stutter or say it incorrectly. Macaulay, thank you.
Yeah.
So they cast Macaulay, and I think they were looking for that kind of performance or something, and I think that's part of it. And I think kind of how we answered, we needed to set up all these things with the family that way they don't look, you know, stupid
Yeah.
or we kind of care with them later. I wonder if all this middle section is to kind of counteract him being kind of a little shit in the beginning, and also kind of how he's kind of violent at the end and kind of doing all these other things to kind of make him more endearing. That way you care about him more. So how do you make a kid more endearing? It's to have him go buy a toothbrush and groceries, and then when he's walking down the side of the road, all the groceries fall apart. You
Yeah.
know, like that's one way to do that. And I mean, I think they were just kind of like really thinking. I bet they knew. I bet they knew 100% when they were writing this act too. They're like, this isn't really working, but we know what we can do.
You know, and it makes me wonder too if like, you know, this is Macaulay Culkin's first film, first credit, I believe. And so I do wonder if some of this was again that kind of found. There was one shot in the beginning, that first 10 minutes, where like it pans across all the kids and they have so many like choreographed lines, and I was just thinking, man, with all these kids in a scene, this may have taken, these shots could have taken forever to get.
Yeah.
Right, with having kids to hit their mark and say their lines correctly and all this kind of stuff. And so I sometimes I do wonder of like, you know, this is a first time child actor in a movie, and they kind of found this magic. They you know, I do really do think that kind of like, you know, he talks very proper and very like, well, excuse me, sir, you know, like in this kind of way that's cute and funny. And I wonder how much of that was found on set. You know what I mean? And so how much of that was okay, we thought it was going to be this, but this is working really good. Let's lean into that. Now, I do think was the toothbrush. I mean, there is a big deal in the beginning of made about like not forgetting your toothbrush, right? When they're getting stuff like ready. I did think that was at least a little bit set up, just that it's, you know, it's a big deal. Don't forget your toothbrush when you're going on a trip. Well, the toothbrush goes, but he doesn't. And
Right.
so, you know, it's like, you know, he's
That's what
kind
makes
of,
me feel like that it's yeah, I just have a feeling, I don't know this, that they didn't rewrite or change a whole lot while making the movie. I really feel like, just again, just the impression I'm getting is that this is kind of intentional, and they kind of just maybe got lucky with him. I don't know, and leaned into it. I don't know, but it feels like there's too many things set up like that to change while you're in production. That's a lot. As we established, that's a lot of setup in the beginning. You know,
Yeah,
I don't know.
it is hard to know. I mean, I think Daniel's right to the extent that obviously, you know, I don't know what order they shot or anything, but clearly they discovered that, you know, they had a gold mine in Macaulay Culkin and his performance, and you know, and that could carry a lot of it. You know, how much of this was scripted, how many scenes they shot and didn't include, you know, is there an extended edition Home Alone, you know, that someone could release with all the other scenes? Who knows? But it is still an odd choice. And to some extent, I think you guys are right in that in the end, they don't really need to connect the dots for their audience. You know, I mean, given the double whammy of a children's movie and a Christmas movie, but also, and it is obviously it's held up pretty well. But at the same time, you just look at it and go, yeah, it's a strange choice to have him make that sort of transition without motivation to acting like an adult. And you know, and you do wish that they had just done the little bit of extra work, like you said, Daniel, to sort of justify in his mind why he needs to be that way.
yeah.
I do feel like, you know, if they didn't have all these, I mean, all this whole movie is iconic in a lot of different ways, right? From scenes, performances, whatever. If one of these things, whether it be an actor or score, whatever, didn't work, I do think this thing would fall apart pretty quickly. Like if
Yeah.
they didn't have Macaulay as the actor, then I do think that we would care way more, obviously, about these issues we have.
Yeah, for
Or
sure.
if the mom wasn't as good, like every time every time we cut to her, not only is it like, you know, a little bit more exciting, a little bit more like, oh, what's going to happen next, but she's really good. Like, I think I like I didn't remember, I thought, how good Catherine O'Hara is as the mom. Like, she feels like a real mom, like in a way that you don't see that often, I feel like, especially in like, you know, family Christmas movies where they're trying to wrap a bow on everything. I thought every time, you know, when she's interacting with the police, I didn't even remember John Candy was in this movie until I rewatched it.
That was my
know?
next thing, was that, you know,
And
that's a perfect example of John Candy. Like that, his whole thing there is has nothing to do with the movie other
yeah,
than giving her a ride.
Yeah.
But they did this whole long, like 1 minute, 2 minute indulgent
yeah,
scene of like, you don't know who I
Just John
am,
Kenny. Yeah.
but it's okay because it's John Candy. And like, you know,
Yeah.
you even feel a little like, oh, John Candy, like he's in so many great movies, and like you miss him, and you want to be with him for a minute and a half longer than you probably need to be
yeah.
in the movie, you know.
Since you mentioned it, Donovan, I also have to mention the score of the movie. John Williams
baby.
score. Yeah, the movie's
good.
directed by Christopher Columbus. And if you go watch a movie from 10 years later, Harry Potter and the
Harry
Sorcerer's
Potter.
Stone, you
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
hear almost the same score. Not to knock
Mhm.
John Williams, but the music is incredibly similar between those two movies, and it
Yes.
kind of makes sense. I mean, there's a certain magical quality to Home Alone,
Yeah.
that John Williams score captures, that's then reflected in the Harry
Yeah.
Potter movie, directed, of course, again by Chris Columbus.
I was
Mhm.
also impressed. So I've got some studio monitors in my office, and sometimes I'll watch a movie on it, and compared to like a TV screen where or even like a sound bar, you're I feel like things sound a lot more mono when you're watching on that, or even at the movie theater. Like, but I really notice the panned items. Like I can notice when, oh, that's only coming in from the right side, kind of stuff. And I was noticing just the way they just layered in bell kind of jingles throughout. And I loved even too that like during the third act in the sequence where he's running from the robbers, they actually they do the theme, but almost like in a minor. They make the theme. It's the same kind of progression, but it's like a scary version of it or a tense version of it that I thought was really good. And I agree. Like I've always wondered, because to me the Harry Potter theme has always sounded like Christmassy.
Mm,
Like I've always had that, just like it just sounds like a Christmassy, like even like almost one of those like minor Christmas songs like Carol of the
yeah.
Bells or something, right? And so it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm like, man, I wonder if this is kind of why, because I kind of grew up watching Christmas movies that had a very similar theme, and
Yeah.
so when I'm watching Harry Potter, I'm like, oh, this just sounds like Christmassy to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing is that every Harry Potter movie, you always go through the seasons, right? So that
Yeah,
first
yeah,
movie,
yeah.
John Williams was doing the Christmas section at one point,
Sure.
and
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, no, I think, well, I mean, just everyone should know this, but you could have a really bad movie and then have John Williams come in and score it, and you might get away with it at the end of the day,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, so that
Uh,
man just he doesn't stop producing bangers.
yeah. So getting into the meat of Act Two, I think one thing, I agree that the movie slows down, but the movie is also clever in how it paces out what happens with the wet bandits, in terms of, they sort of they give up initially, but Harry's not quite ready to give up, has been scoping this place out forever. He thinks it's sort of the gem of the block, the best place to rob, and so
The silver tuna, as they said.
yeah, and so even though we don't really have until the third act, Kevin fully defending the house, he does have to continue to do things to scare the guys away, and he stages the whole party at the house with he's got the ropes, and he's pulling Michael Jordan's
Did they
cardboard
set up
cutout
the
back and forth.
mannequins? Where did he get the mannequins? Did they set that up earlier in the movie, being
They're in
somewhere?
the basement.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Well, in the article that you sent us beforehand, Bruce,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
mentioned that I guess the novel, the adaptation for the book, that he kind of determined she was a fashion designer based on the mannequins. So
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, pretty
interesting.
interesting.
But yeah, he does have we do see the first time he goes down into the basement, and he encounters the furnace and all that
Okay.
sort of stuff. We see some older mannequin heads and stuff like that. I don't know, I can't remember if we see the full-bodied ones, but yeah, so he does that, and they keep coming back. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I had a question that this one kind of confused me. So um, they run into Kevin, right? And he kind of goes and loses them at the church, which again, another great example of like constantly setting up locations and paying off later. But after he escapes, this is like minute 44, he says, "I'll be ready next time." And I was kind of like, what makes you think they're going to, I don't know. I just kind of felt like, I thought that was super odd. I didn't know why he was like, "I'll be ready next time." I don't know. I just feel like,
Did he
how would he
overhear them say
know?
something?
I mean, I think they were jiggling at the door, right? And then
Yeah.
earlier, but he never saw their face.
Yeah.
And then now they're chasing him in the car, and I mean, how does he make that
Well, but
connection?
are you talking about the part where he's looking out
there was
the
the gold
window?
tooth.
Are you talking
Right,
about
that's before, yeah.
where he's looking out the window and he can hear them say, "We'll be coming back tonight at 9"?
That's later. That's at the
Okay,
end of
okay.
That's
Act
later,
Two.
but like at minute 44, after he like he's at the manger scene, he says, "I'll be ready next time."
I
That's what
think
he
it is the
says.
gold. I think the gold tooth is supposed to be the main thing, because he recognizes Joe Pesci in the van as the cop, and then
Yeah.
he
But how do you
somehow
make,
puts this stuff together. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. How do you make that connection from the
Yeah.
cop to him? I don't know. That was my question, I guess. So thought that was a little weak. So anyway,
Yeah. But that does sort of end up, pointing up the Act Two climax, which to me is when he overhears Harry and Marv say that they're going to rob the house at 9.
yep,
Because a couple of things come together. First of all, Kate also right before that gets her Act Two climax, because that's when she runs into Gus, John Candy, and she gets the ride. So basically, that's sort of her Act Two climax, as she sort of gets the final piece of the puzzle to get back to Chicago. And then right after that, Kevin scares them. I forget what happens honestly, but he sort of foils them again. They don't come in, but he overhears them saying they're going to come back at 9 that night. And then it does bring back a little bit of his internal goal, because then he sort of asks, Mom, where are you? And so it does, he kind of feels like he's on his own, and he wishes that they were there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, kind of going to the church scene with the old man. Um, you know, it's kind of like, how do you feel about your family, right? And the old man is just like a mere reflection of Kevin, but older. That's what it is at the very end of the day. And you kind of wonder, why couldn't it have been Kevin is kind of, why couldn't it have been reversed? Why couldn't the old man be, it's very human, right? He kind of knows where he messed up, but he's teaching somebody. And then through teaching it to somebody else, he's like, okay, I need to go talk to my son, blah, blah, blah. Why? I wonder why they kind of flipped it, just because it's more cute to have a little kid teach an old man, or
I don't know, because you're right. It does. Again, it sort of undercuts the connection between the two goals, and having him just already have, I guess he learns that lesson sort of finally at the end of Act Two, when he knows that the robbers are coming back and he needs his family and they're not there. Then maybe the lesson has sunk in that he needs his family. And then at the beginning of Act Three, before it's 9 o'clock, is when he goes to the church and he talks to Marley, sort of right at the beginning of Act Three, if I remember. And so I guess he's learned that lesson. It is super early. I mean, sometimes movies do that, where it's the end of the penultimate act, they figure out the internal goal. But again, your solution makes more sense, Donovan, in that if he learned it from Marley, it would, I think, feel sort of more natural kind of going into the final act.
Yeah, and I think okay, I blank. Go ahead, Donovan.
well, I was going to say, I kind of, so you're putting I see now, you're putting the end of Act Two where Mom, where are you? Right?
Yeah.
I put
Yeah.
the end of Act Two of like, it's my house, I have to defend it. And then we're going into like the final climax kind of thing. So I kind of, to me, the end of the church scene, that whole thing there, then over here, the 9 p.m. or the clock tower hitting 9 p.m., that was the start of Act Three for me.
Okay.
So
When he
yeah,
starts
that's kind of
running,
where,
yeah.
yeah, it's
Well,
like, I mean, it's literally, yeah.
And the thing I was going to say is, like, again, this is kind of where, again, my memory of the movie wasn't correct, but it also, I think my memory made more sense. In my memory, it was like, once he knew they were coming, that's all he did was get ready for them, right? And so I do think it is interesting that he's like, they're coming at 9 o'clock. I'll be prepared. And the next scene, I think, is him going to ask Santa Claus for his family back, right? And it's just like this weird, like, okay, I thought that was urgent, and now it's dark outside too. And so it is this weird thing where we're building up to this moment where he defends the house, but it does almost feel tacked on. Like, it's like he has the emotional moment with Marty, right? And then it's like the clock strikes and he's like, I'm gonna defend my house, and then that's like all we're dealing with, right, for the next act or so. It's the transition is not very smooth right there again.
Yeah, it is weird, and of course I think the fact that when he overhears that they're coming back at 9, and then when he's got to defend his house, that everything in between is all internal plot line versus external plot line, also argues that you could almost put those either way, right? You could put them at the end of Act Two, or you could put them at the start of Act Three, because they're not really related to the external plot line. And it is weird that once he's like, oh, okay, they're coming at 9, and now it seems like I don't know that we know exactly what time it is, but it feels like it's late afternoon when he hears that.
Right.
So, and it is winter, so let's say it's 4 o'clock because it's still
Right.
light out. He then spends the next 5 hours doing these other things, right?
Yeah.
He goes to Santa's workshop to ask for his family back, presumably because he feels like he needs them to defend the house. I mean, he misses them, but I'm like immediately that's the thing, right? And then he ends up at the church and has the encounter with Marley. Yeah, and all of those things are happening, and then he goes back, I guess, and does all that we don't, and then does the setup. I guess the setup happens after that, right? In terms of all the stuff that he's preparing, all the booby traps and stuff like that.
Yeah, the clock tower hits at hour and 13. Kevin starts prepping at hour and 14, and then the burglars arrive at hour and 15. So
yeah,
well, and that's also right here is our last cutaway to his mom, right? We don't go back to her till the end of the movie when she arrives. It's that last. I mean, it's like he hears they're coming at 9:30. We cut to her being annoyed by John Candy's like kazoo playing or flute. I can't remember what it was, and then boom, he's asking Santa for his family back. So
he plays the clarinet.
Clarinet, excuse me.
yeah.
Clarinet, kazoo, same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last bit here is just it's 18 minutes of
hijinks,
the fun stuff which is funny too, because I've seen this movie 1,000 times. There was stuff that I was fusing Home Alone 2 and Home Alone 1.
Yeah.
Like I was like, oh wait, that's not in this movie, that's in the other one. And so which that one would be even probably more fascinating to watch, because that at the very that's like 5 minutes at the end. The robbers come at the very end. It's like super coincidental, anyway. So that would be a really interesting to kind of break down. But yeah, I mean, of course, this is the part, probably the most famous stuff, where I've made like a little timeline here of like here we're cutting back and forth and like what trap is happening, whatever.
Right.
But it's just fun stuff, the nail, all the stairs, and yeah, I mean, I can't say much about it other than it's fun. It's great.
And I think the other thing that we can say, and this gets to some of the stuff that Daniel was mentioning early, it's incredibly violent.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And it's played for laughs, and that is a tricky thing to do. I mean, for all the ways I'm being critical of the movie, the fact that it can sort of have this kid be like this violent, and of course, part of it is that the criminals deserve it, so to speak, but that you can have him do that, and that we don't think that he's some,
sociopath.
sadistic sociopath.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I think part of it is in the reactions of the guys. Like it becomes very Looney Tunesy, slapsticky. But there's moments like, I don't know if you caught it, but Joe Pesci says, "I'm going to cut off your balls and boil them in motor oil." At one point, while they're like chasing him up the stairs, and I was like, I did not catch that before this watch. Like, it's interesting because they're doing that to him, and then they're like threatening murder and being like, "I'm going to bite off all your fingers." You know what I mean? It's just this like it goes to 11 on the violence scale, to and from. It's interesting.
There's a great YouTube channel I've followed for a long time called Corridor Crew, and they went in and basically made it what if Home Alone was rated R, and it's just great. Like, it's basically just the last sequence, but just everything goes rated R, and it's pretty well done. But yeah, no, I mean, that's a fine line there, and I think even the second movie, again, I was combining them as I was watching this one, where like at one point he's getting electrocuted, and it's like his skull, it's very Looney Tunes, you know what I'm saying? So they kind of get away with that kind of stuff with their reaction. But yeah, I mean, it's a fine line to walk, and I don't know.
I mean, the fact that the guys never react like any of these are like permanent injuries when like most of them are, I guess, is what sells it. The fact that they kind of dust themselves off and, all right, I'm gonna get you now. I mean, like, it was kind of funny. Like the first time, I think maybe the second time, like Joe Pesci slips on the ice and he's like, he's like literally saying, he's not saying words in a hushed tone. He's saying, he's like, it was just funny to me. But yeah, it is. They are so cartoonish, in both being kind of mustache twirly bad guys, but then also just like, they're like the coyote, he gets jumped off the, Roadrunner runs him off the cliff and he's still showing up in the next little segment.
I was thinking earlier when I said a way to maybe fix one of the oddities, and maybe again, I'm not trying to fix a classic, right? But I think maybe there was an opportunity somewhere to make Harry have a kid, or he's doing this for his son, or he's doing this for his family, or something.
I feel like that's the modern version, right? That's the modern version, is that like the criminals are made
more fleshed out,
more humanized, right?
Yeah,
like
there's
that you
something there. I don't
empathize,
know.
but then the violence doesn't work, and so you really like that's just a
Right,
different
right.
movie. That's just a different
Yeah, it
movie.
is. Yeah.
Like that. That's like that would be an interesting movie.
But I've watched this movie a lot, right? At least once a year, probably once a year my whole life. But this morning I was sitting there cracking up, like laughing, because some of the reactions and the sound effects, like the bones crunching and those kind of things, are just so funny and just ridiculous, So
yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because that the movie, obviously the climax of that external plot line comes when he ends up running across the street to the other house, and then they catch him, and then Marley comes and saves him, right? And
I did not remember that part at all.
And
I don't remember Marley saving him.
It's so fascinating, and it's sort of like, well, you could like, if you wanted to build more of the plot around the robbers, you could have imagined like them catching him earlier and having him longer. But again, that would be a different movie. It's a kid's movie, and so I think it would be weird, if they had him, like they only have him for a moment, right? And so if they did any, if they did any more, I think it would be strange, because like, what are they going to do to this kid? And I think
it gets awkward.
a little scary.
Yeah.
I think Marley has to deal with it pretty quickly.
Well, even they hang him on the door. They still make it funny and silly. They hang him on the door coat, and so you just got this funny image of Macaulay Culkin hanging on like a coat rack. And so like, I agree though. It is like there was another moment I'm having trouble thinking of. I'm like, well, this would be creepy if this happened in real life to Kevin. Like you know what I mean?
Well, and so then we get this last 9 minutes, which is basically, the going back to the internal goal and sort of wrapping it all up. And to me, like, there's so many problems with the last 10 minutes of the movie. As wonderful as it is emotionally when Kevin and his mom are reunited. So I got to start, first of all, Marley saves Kevin. Hopefully you see what's coming here. The police show up and arrest Harry and Marv, and then everybody leaves this kid by himself alone.
Well, okay, but they didn't know he was there. They didn't know he was there, right? Like Marley hits him.
The genius of,
so he runs home, and the cops are never aware that he was involved.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they set that up with the wet bandit thing, because that's why whenever you open that door, you're like, oh, this is a house they've already been at because it's flooding, right? Which I never picked up on before.
No, I didn't.
Like, as a kid, I was like, this house is flooding for some reason.
I mean, theoretically, yes, but I mean, Marley knows that Kevin is there. Marley calls the police.
Yeah,
there's no real way, again, I know this isn't a realistic movie based on the 20 minutes right before this, but there's no way that the police come and arrest these two guys and have no knowledge of Kevin. And Marley seemingly doesn't seem to be aware that Kevin is home alone, or like, I mean, what should Marley knocks them out, rescues Kevin. He should like take him home and go, hey, parents, I just,
that makes sense.
I was like, but none of that happens.
Yes.
He just ends up back inside waving,
and just lies to the police,
grin,
about the cop, what happened. Yeah.
Who knows? But so we have that huge plot hole. When I mentioned plot holes being so big you could drive a truck through that's the main one I'm thinking of. But even once the mom comes home, I still think there's some issues. Kevin thinks he wished his family away, but the movie never resolves that. You know what I mean? Like, she shows up and she's like, I'm sorry. And it's almost like he knows what happened. You know what I mean? It's like he knows that they forgot him because he kind of looks at her like trying to decide whether he's going to forgive her. And then he runs over and he gives her a hug. But there's never any question of like, what happened to you? Did I wish you away? You know what I mean? Like there's this big setup that he thinks that he magically made them disappear. And then the movie just sort of lets that go. It pretends that didn't happen.
I kind of think it's more of he's accepting the apology of their argument, not that she left. Like to me, that was kind of always the.
Sure.
I mean, you're totally right.
that.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's this weird meta. I mean, the movie's meta. He like literally talks to the camera throughout the movie, but
Yeah.
it is this weird. We know the movie's trying to wrap up.
And
we
again,
don't care.
it's an easy fix. I mean, all he has to do is like whisper thank you to Santa because he thinks the wish that he gave to that guy really worked or something,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
they have the pieces there to set that reaction up, but they don't do much with it. Yeah, and
it also feels like he's, I don't know, maybe I guess he does believe it. I kind of never got the impression that he's actually believing what's going on. I guess he does talk to that fake Santa and he's like, I know the real deal, you're just working for the real one. So I guess he does believe in Santa. Yeah, I just never really thought about it too hard, you know? I thought it was kind of odd not odd, but like, it's not, the dad and them show up right whenever, you know, it's like, remember that plane you didn't, whatever. I don't know, I kind of felt a little, I don't know why, but it kind of felt a little gross to me for some reason. It kind of made her feel not as smart or something. I don't know.
There was this element of like, you shouldn't have been worrying, woman. Don't worry. You're always fretting. You know, you could have just done it the right way and you got in here at the same time. You know, look what all that extra work got you. No, you know, kind of this weird.
That's it.
No, I got just a little bit of that tone. Yeah.
I mean, it is there, but of course, you know, we need her to do that because we need to see, again, a little stereotypical, but a mother's love for her son, right? And what she's willing to do to try to get there as soon as possible, right? And then of course, you know, the last thing, which is sort of the thing we alluded to before, we get the full closure of the internal goal, which is he's reunited with his family. He understands, you know, that he needs them, and we even get a little bit of him sort of, you know, them acknowledging he's not so bad and vice versa. But again,
for no reason.
But we don't connect it. Yeah, I mean, well, Buzz weirdly says like, I guess you deserve some credit for not like burning down the house. Although Buzz seems like the kind of character who thinks that Kevin should have burned down the house. You know,
right?
I mean,
it would have tricked him into doing it if he had been there with him. Yeah.
Well, there was one scene with like, I don't know her name, but she's talking to Buzz when they were at the, you know, discussing like he's at the house, we're here,
right?
And that was kind of like a small connective tissue to kind of make the rest of the family feel like sympathetic towards Kevin's situation. But they kind of course correct the Buzz thing at the last line of the movie when he's like, you messed up my room. So
right. But and then again, we don't really connect the two goals, right? We don't really connect defending the house with missing his family. I mean, it's there thematically, right? I mean, it makes sense that if he's under attack and these robbers are trying to steal all this stuff and he's scared, that he would want his family. So the connection is there thematically, but again, normally with Hollywood is sort of like one informs the other. And it's not that they have to, but it just makes everything feel slightly disconnected in a way that like it could have really all meshed together and been really great. And it's, again, what it does well, but the
ultimate way to fix that is you have the mom show up. Why you had the mom save him and not Marley, right? You have, that's how you do it.
I was just thinking too, I was like, his family at the end of this movie never has any idea that his external conflict happened. Like there's no, I mean, in theory, there should be like physical evidence of the traps he set. And like, you'd think they would have questions and something, or it might come out then, but like, it is this weird thing of like the internal, it illustrates the disconnect that the internal goal of reuniting with family, they don't even get to find out what happened on the external goal level. at least it's a secret
I
between him
hadn't.
and
I wish
Marley.
I had thought of that, Donovan. I mean, you're right. I mean, to me, it would have been so much better if she's the one who knocks out the
Yeah.
criminals,
Mhm.
and then by the way, that solves that plot hole because she calls the police. They're all there. Everything's kind of crazy, and then as
Yeah.
all of that's happening, or maybe just as the police drive off and everything seems normal, then the rest of the family pulls up,
Right.
having
Right.
just arrived from the airport, thinking that nothing happened, right? But it would have
Right.
been so much more rewarding for Kate to actually have arrived and seen what Kevin had gone through, helped to because he is rescued. It's not like he gets out of it
Yeah.
himself. Marley
Mhm.
rescues him, so why not have Kate rescue him? I mean, God, you just made the movie better. I mean, to me, that
Yeah.
would have been
Thanks.
such a stronger movie
Yeah.
ending.
Well,
I can't
it's
say
like,
stronger, but ending, yeah.
and the
And you
Marley
can still have
character,
the
honestly, you don't need him.
right.
You don't need. I mean, he really is this kind
Yeah.
of strange character that, like, you know,
I do like him as a character.
I like
Yeah,
his.
you can
I like the actor, and I like the kind of character he is. But in terms of like the ways he influences the plot, it is like not really a necessary character because again, it's it's just another. At first, he's just another thing Kevin's scared of, and then he becomes the person Kevin teaches the lesson he just learned. And then at the
Yeah.
end, it's, he's the savior, which is like, okay, that's fine. But like you said, there's a stronger version where someone more important to the internal goal is the savior.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And
and
then
then-
it links them together, right? Because then he needs, he needs his family to help him get out of the thing, which is sort of what the setup has been the whole time, but then it's not what
Right.
happens, right?
Right.
It's yeah, it all it almost feels rushed in a way,
It does.
Um,
I agree.
Yeah, no,
I guess there's
I'm
some
dying
kind
to
of
watch the
connection
second one.
between, I know, there's some kind of connection between like, um, Kevin and his family don't get along great, maybe. And like, this is the, if you don't get along, this is what your relationships might turn into. And so it's kind of it's supposed to be this kind of cautionary tale, I guess, for Kevin in a way, but I don't think it works well like that. I don't feel like it's like, Kevin is like, he's already figured it out by the time he's talking to him about that stuff.
Right.
But there's
Yeah.
there's a way I think he integrates better, or if there's a way we don't need that character and we'll, use the mom or something. It is interesting because there's a very, very, very similar character in Home Alone 2, where it's like the crow lady in that movie, where it's like at first he's scared of her and then it turns out she's a nice person kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's just like, that does feel like a trope that I'm used to some degree, of like, the older person who seems scary at
Scary
first,
senior
and then
citizen.
yeah, honestly, yes.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that they're like these nice, warm, gentle people, just
Right.
with a rough exterior kind of thing. So yeah, it's interesting.
You could always have, instead of them just trying to knock over this house, like maybe they're trying to steal something specific that is important to the family. And I know, like, I think it would have been a little stronger if the characters, like the family, had appreciated the house more, or like it meant more to them in some way, because they should have showed up still upset with Kevin and then realized that when Kevin saved whatever he saved, the house or whatever item it is, they're like, oh, okay, like we forgive you or whatever.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, because the article that you referenced
Yeah.
earlier that I sent you guys is just for everyone else, is a New York Times article that just happened to come out today about wondering how wealthy Kevin's family is, and there's a couple of paragraphs that they dedicate to the possibility that Kevin's father was involved with organized crime.
Right.
And that's why the house was targeted by the wet bandits, because they knew the dad was an organized crime and they assumed something was in there.
Interesting.
So maybe that could happen, but either way, I think even just leaving it the same and just like you said, having the mom rescue him, I think just would have solved so many of the issues that I have here. And I'm super glad, by the way, that because I came in here, I'm gonna be the Grinch all about Home Alone and sort of see these problems in this great classic, but I'm glad that you guys kind of agreed and saw possible solutions, because it is a super fun movie. It's a great holiday movie. It just feels like it could have been like a perfect, could have been great. It could have had everything exactly right. And instead it's like, yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I know it's a great classic, but again, it's a classic because of Macaulay Culkin. I
Yeah.
think more than, like I am moved by the ending, but I think I would have been more moved if it had been done right. And like you said, Daniel, the movie is what's memorable is the 20 minutes with the bandits, with the robbers, right? More than like the real heart and soul that could have been. I mean, it's there, but it could have been, I think, even stronger.
Well, and I think it feels classic. I think honestly, partly because it is Macaulay Culkin's breakout hit, where he becomes like a huge child star of the 90s, right? At least especially the first half of the 90s. And so I do think there is this element of like, it's the first Home Alone, and Home Alone, well, the third one and the rest of them went interesting ways. But I don't know. There's something about it feeling like it's the original. It's kind of the beginning of Macaulay Culkin, the beginning of this kind of classic Christmas series. And so maybe it gets more attention for that. But I mean, again, and maybe next year we'll do it. I've always preferred Lost in New York. I just thought it was
Let's do it next
more
December.
fun movie. You know what I mean? Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. I do want to ask you guys one last question before we hop off here, just because I'm curious and I'm not sure I know the answer. What's your guys, and I'll answer last, what's your favorite Christmas movie? Bruce, if you have one.
I don't know if I have one. I actually was thinking about this the other day. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really have that movie that I watch like every Christmas religiously, I guess I gotta find it. I still need to find it.
You don't have one you like might watch every year or every other year or something like that? Nothing like
Always
that?
watch it when it's on, kind of thing, if it's on.
No.
Not really. Not really.
Wow.
No.
Wow.
I mean, I guess if I was, the closest I can come to answering that is actually a movie we were referencing earlier, which is I always watch the Harry Potter movies starting around Halloween, and I try to peak them to finish in December, and so it's not so much it's more of a fall winter series than a Halloween or a Christmas specifically, but it is part of that idea.
Yeah. I do love Harry Potter.
It's about as close as I get. And I do that every, Christy and I watch all 8 movies every year.
That's cool.
That's awesome. That's
I mean,
great tradition.
It is
one
interesting.
A week for 6 weeks,
Wow.
The Christmas sections in those movies are always like, I remember those pretty clearly.
Oh, the snow.
There's
and
so much
Hogwarts.
fun.
Oh,
Well, and just like the
good.
fun little
The first
treats
couple,
that come out, like the special Christmas treats and like
Butterbeer.
them on the, yes. Yeah, exactly.
And like you said, the music has sort of a Christmassy feel. So
totally.
I guess that would be the closest I would have for an answer.
Good answer.
Daniel. Yeah, I mean, I don't have ones that I watch every year. I'm not very religious about any movie like that. But I mean, I think if I'm talking about just favorite as a child, Jingle All the Way. I think I mentioned this when we were in a meeting the other day. I just felt like they played that on repeat on ABC Family every year when I was a kid. And like when I was a kid, we didn't have cable at my house, so I only got to watch cable at my grandmother's house, and of course we'd be over there a lot during Christmas, so like that's when you get to watch TV, is around the holidays. And so I mean, Jingle All the Way was just, I loved it as a kid. And then I mean, a modern one that again I don't watch intentionally very frequently, but it is one that I will watch if it's on, and it's one I actually like, is The Holiday. I think that one, I love Jack Black in that one. I think he's hilarious, and it's this nice little Christmas rom-com that I think does a pretty good job in both of the kind of dual stories they're telling with Cameron Diaz and I'm blanking on she's the Australian actress, I think. Anyway, so that The Holiday is one that I really enjoy. It's also just fun. I think there's some like old Hollywoodness to that movie where he's Cameron Diaz is like the film editor for like film trailers, and then they like had that guy across the street that's like this old Hollywood kind of stalwart or whatever. So anyway, stalwart. So The
Kate
Holiday.
Winslet is the other actor.
Yes.
That's my mother-in-law's favorite Christmas movie too. So yeah,
it's nothing
yeah, a lot of people
crazy,
love it. Yeah.
but it's a nice little rom-com. I think I do like Jack Black, so I think it's enjoyable with him in it. But yeah, no.
I've never seen it all the way through. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting for all filmmakers. We all have different things. I have like like 4th of July. I watch Independence Day every year. Halloween. I watch. I try to watch Fright Night and Pumpkinhead every year. At least those two. But yeah, for me, my number one answer, like best Christmas movie ever, is probably Christmas Vacation. That was like a tradition in my house on
Yeah.
Christmas Day. We'd always watch that movie. Of course, there's the other staples like Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, Jingle All the Way. That's my top 4 probably. I've made an effort the last 3 or 4 years to watch Kiss Kiss Bang Bang every fall. But yeah, no, Christmas Vacation's my answer. So I was just curious. I didn't know if you guys had one or not. Or
I will say we
what.
did not every year, but there was a few years in a row we watched A Christmas Story every year, and I do
Cool.
like A Christmas Story. That is to me a classic.
Well, guys, we did another one in the books. We closing out 2023 with Home Alone. I love the idea of doing Home Alone 2 next year. And Bruce, I can't thank you enough for joining us this year on the channel, and hopefully we can do it more even next year as we come up on our 5th anniversary, and as we hopefully hit 200 episodes. Probably, yeah, we'll do it. We'll hit 200, I think, really soon, actually.
Yeah.
And how can our listeners find the cool things that you do?
Primarily you can find me at thehutchfiles.com, which is my website and my Substack newsletter. So if you go there, please subscribe so you can get all of, I do all the breakdowns of the movies we do on here, plus other breakdowns, plus other stuff. So that's the main thing. I'm trying to push that a little harder because I'm terrible at self-promotion. And you can also find me on Instagram at BD Hutch.
Awesome. Daniel, how can our listeners find us, or not find us? How can they ask us questions, I guess?
Listeners, you can write into bit.ly/241mail and let us know what you think of Home Alone. Is it an untouchable classic? Have we been spewing blasphemy in this past 90 minutes? We want to know. Share your vitriol at bit.ly/241mail.
And if you can't hit us up at our Bitly, you can always find us in the comment section below. Again, youtube.com/2for1studios is the best place to consume anything 2for1. Bruce, thank you again so much. Daniel, it's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to 2024 and the many, many hijinks we have coming our way. And yeah, I look forward to. I'm can't wait for the next script breakdown. So.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a new year and some new movies. But in the meantime, have a wonderful Christmas and a happy new year and great holiday. Yeah.
Perfect. Great way to end it, everyone. My name is Donovan Thompson.
I'm Daniel Wingfield.
I'm Bruce Hutchinson.
And we have spoken.